Elon 2 space station in orbit around Mars, Tuesday, December 12, 3116. After the tour of the nearly finished assault boat, we then inspected the nearby autofab bays where more Higgins-type vessels had just begun construction. One was a near duplicate of the vessel we just toured and would act as its backup. The others were experimental derivatives. The final two were simply unmanned assault carriers designed to deliver and deploy octopod assault units. One of the carriers had landing legs like the manned landing craft, while the second had a sharply pointed and heavily armored breaching bow. This last boat was designed to ram into the thinner-skinned, central tapering portion of the Ark and disgorge its octopod troops inside. Both carriers were being designed by Praxia with minimal input from Alec and Hannah. I'd have to investigate their planned use further when I had a free moment. With nothing more to see at the fabrication yard, Omu and I returned with Hannah and Alec to the nearby habitat station. I was going to spend the night in my quarters and enjoy a bit of downtime before heading back to the Martian surface late tomorrow. We were in a smaller shuttle pod, and with it being near the end of the local workday, 4 others were traveling to the habitat with us, making for a cramped ride. Luckily, after a brief meet and greet, the other passengers escaped into virtual, allowing for the 3 of us to discuss some items I'd noted from the tour. Of course, with the other passengers having still active augments, I would have to watch what I said and how I phrased things. "I am impressed with you both," I commented, "not only for the hard physical work of integrating Higgins's various systems, but with the historical research you've done to prepare tactics. I know Alec has extensively studied history to perfect his martial arts," Hannah replied, "but I was surprised that I enjoyed the research as much as I did. Maybe it was because I was constantly seeking to apply what I was learning to the current conditions." "What historical periods have you learned the most from?" I asked. "Well, the 2 world wars, of course," Hannah explained, "notably the Houtier tactics from the first in the siege of Leningrad during the second. Other battles before and after those wars were also insightful, like Sadr City in Iraq, which had happened about the time I was born." I flashed back to the campaign in Iraq. A school buddy had lost his son during that controversial war, and I remember sharing in his sorrow. I'd been lucky enough to have grown up between major crises, having been too young to be involved in Vietnam and too old to be serving during the Gulf turmoil. "We've even studied your solitary battle against the assemblage launch facility on Baltra Island," Alec added. "We have created a virtual walkthrough from your point of view. If you ever want to relive that moment of glory, have Praxia load it for you." I just shook my head while mouthing a silent no. "Did you learn anything from your research that might help with either of our stern or bow attacks?" I asked after a moment. "We did," Alex said. "We noted the historical use of smokescreens and radar chaff as cover and diversion. We've discussed much of this already with Praxia, and the AI has begun to integrate the possibilities into the various attack options. What are your takes on the 2 failed attacks?" I asked next. "The bastard Ark is a tough nut to crack," Hannah replied with a sour expression. Alec nodded in agreement. I have to admit I was surprised to see how well the assemblage dealt with both attack methods. I know the AIs had told us that the poor outcomes were likely, but still, if only we had the ability to form our wormhole inside the Ark somewhere, I speculated, we could then bypass their trailing mines and forward debris protection weaponry. "Yeah, almost like laying siege to a castle," Hannah exclaimed. "We divert them on one side while sapping a tunnel under their wall on the other. Once we dig under far enough, we load it full of antimatter and boom!" She'd said the last so loudly that 2 of the other passengers came out of virtual. "Sorry," she apologized sheepishly. They quickly returned to their digital pursuits. "Well, yes, that might work," I replied, although I was thinking of what else we could do inside the enemy, other than load it full of risky-to-handle explosives. Both of them looked at me for a moment before nodding thoughtfully. They'd realized that I was referring to acid rain, which I'd left primed and ready back on Vesta. I was now back in my station quarters, enjoying the first moment of solitude I'd had in more than a week. When we had reached the station, I had joined Hannah and Alec for a quick supper in the station's cafeteria before we each went our separate ways. Once in my apartment, I'd taken a quick shower and then spent an hour in virtual using the active microcom link to catch up with friends and family back on Earth. I reached out to my daughters first, enjoying a nice talk with Kayla, but having to leave messages with both Charity and Larissa, who were busy or still asleep. I'd then tried Serenity and surprisingly found her awake, despite the very early hour at the island. Just as surprising, she was in a good mood. Serenity reported that all was well back on Heels in the Sand. Cassius had left the island again weeks ago, but she had quickly replaced him, this time falling for one of the island's visiting guests. As she described her relationship with this much older person, I had to hold back a frown. I'd avoided asking any probing questions, but from the details she'd freely given, it sounded like Serenity was becoming someone's mistress. Oh, the young! They just had to learn some life lessons on their own, and sadly, often the hard way. When it was her turn for questions, Serenity was all over the subject of her dad and his new Martian girlfriend. Of course, I teased her about it. I openly speculated on the likelihood of a half-Martian half-brother. I gushed how awesome it would be for her to have a princess stepmother. Finally, I just laughed at her souring expression at my antics. I then laughed even harder when I upset her further over my refusal to spill any juicy details. She would just have to ask her dad about those herself. While I had been off communicating in virtual, the kitchen's fabricator had been busy producing fresh painting supplies. I planned to relax by taking advantage of the station's Earth-normal, simulated gravity to attempt to create art. So when I emerged from virtuality, I assembled my new canvases, brushes, and paints and got to work. This time the effort came easily, and now 2 hours later, I was deep into my third piece. It was a space scene. I'd started with a black canvas and piled on the bright acrylics. The image was that of Higgins lit by braking thrusters, moments from contact with the hull of the Ark. I'd ramped up the intensity by including a firefight. Higgins now had fore and aft mounted Gauss cannons, which were spewing steady streams of high-velocity projectiles at a swarm of Ark-launched surface-to-air missiles. That I'd made up both without evidence was not important. Hannah and Alec are approaching the main entry, Omu reported quietly from her kneeling position at her charging station. I hurried to finish my current series of brushstrokes, but caught the android rising to meet the kids. I relaxed, not having to worry about losing the mental image I was working on. She would greet them and allow them entry while I finished. I was so deep in the grove that I did not notice their entry or approach. "Dad, that's amazing," my son said, bringing me out of my creative bubble. I considered the whole and judged it done. I quickly thinned a glob of cadmium red into an ink-like consistency and scrolled on my signature with an extra-long fine point liner. "Not too much embellishment?" I asked, finally stepping back. "No, although we planned for Higgins to be equipped with standoff drones for its close-in defenses. I wanted to keep everything in tight and close for the painting," I explained. "Besides, the magnetically accelerated projectiles would be visible, glowing in the dark of space. Better to paint than a matte black drone." "Your painting has improved so much over the years, Jon," Hannah gushed. "It's like Alec in his training," I replied unpretentiously. Endless time allows one to tease the limits of perfection, although I wish improvements were linear and not logarithmic. They spotted the 2 paintings I'd already finished and set aside for drying. I pretended to be unconcerned as they scrutinized both in silence. The first smaller canvas was a surreal impressionist scene of the Phobos control room. I'd finally managed to finish the painting and thought it a satisfactory effort at paying tribute to those so devoted to the offensive. I noticed Alec grimace as he caught the way I'd portrayed his mother in deep interface. Good. The second painting was of the Martian dawn I'd witnessed yesterday, back in Copertes Casma, the reddish dawn sunlight spilling over the rim of Valles Marineris and reflecting off the boiling exposed brine ponds, the billowing vapors drifting away lazily off the image from the thin thermal air currents. "This one is magical," Hannah whispered. I was unable to refrain from smiling at her comment. That was exactly the effect I had wanted, and I intended to gift the painting to the princess when I returned to the surface. Hannah had just confirmed that the odds were good it would be received well. "So, what brings the 2 of you around this late?" I asked. "We've come up with an idea," Alex said. "It's from something Hannah remembered." "Let me clean up, and then we will talk," I said, pointing them toward the apartment's lounge area. Omu prepared beverages while I washed up in the sonic cleanser. As always, I was surprised at all the paint splotches. I tended to use my fingers occasionally, which then transferred paint to other parts of my body while I was lost in the moment. Shortly after, now wearing just a light robe, I rejoined my guest. "What have you come up with?" "I'll let Hannah tell it as it was her idea," Alex said. "I think I may have come up with a way to use acid rain against the assemblage." I sat up. "Do tell." "I was thinking about what you asked, about if we've learned anything from studying history that would help us with the current attacks," Hannah began. "First, your comment about opening a wormhole inside the Ark reminded me of the old stories of the Trojan horse, about getting inside the enemy defenses. If we could find a way to safely target an 8-light-year-long wormhole directly into the enemy Ark's computer room. Boom! Quick victory. I nodded. It was an early option we'd considered and one all of us still fantasized about. The problem was how to form the wormhole safely inside something of which we had no knowledge. If the wormhole terminus opened while impacting any significant matter. Boom! Feedback explosion, and we just lost our hard-to-replace wormhole mechanism. For that to work, we would need to get our scout probes inside and have a look around, right? Hannah continued. When I nodded, she continued. And then, once they find an open space large enough, they would need to send back accurate reference data to Sarissa to target its wormhole precisely. Both of those would be helpful, I agreed. Then I remembered reading about naval raiding ships, Hannah explained. Huh? I grunted in more of a comment than a question. Raider ships? I delved deep into memory. Raider ships had been warships disguised as harmless merchant vessels. They carried hidden weaponry which they would then use with sudden great effect, after being allowed in close to an eager and unaware enemy. Are you saying that we need to build a space ship that looks like one of theirs? Cut, I asked uncertainly. Have we even seen one of their ships up close? I knew that we had detected small remote objects on parallel courses with the Ark. It was assumed that these were remote sensing satellites, similar to the very long baseline units we'd used on our interstellar spaceships, or out at the Argus Array on the fringes of the solar system. No, we don't have to make our infiltrator raider look like one of theirs, Alex said with a grin. We can make it look like anything, and it will still work. I'm not following, I replied. Dad, if you use a strong enough smelling bait, it doesn't matter what it looks like, even if it looks like a trap. What would the enemy want that badly? I asked. What's the one thing humanity possesses that the assemblage does not? Alec replied with a smirk. A home? I replied instantly. But as I had said that, I realized what he must be referring to. You want to dangle wormhole technology in front of them as bait? I asked incredulously. They both nodded. They would be unable to resist, Alex stated. Omu? I would have to concur, the android said from where she stood watching our byplay. Alec and Hannah then took turns explaining the details they'd come up with so far regarding the risky plan. They were also forthright in stating that much remained to be resolved. The basis of the plan was actually very simple. We'd offer the enemy a gift of our technology. In accepting that gift, they would open themselves to our follow-on crippling attack. The downside, if we failed, was that we would have given our enemy our one trump card. Still, I agreed the risky plan was worth exploring further. If it worked, it would end a costly offensive almost before it got started. That offensive now seeming far less trivial than I'd imagined it playing out just weeks ago. With the late hour, we tabled working out the details, as we were all quickly growing tired. Alec and Hannah had wanted to continue discussing the idea in virtual, where our fatigue could be mitigated, but I refused. We would schedule a future meeting to develop the idea, and I insisted that we include Alec's mother. Omu would coordinate our schedules and arrange a venue. I was scheduled to travel back to the surface to rejoin Riho, but Naomi could clandestinely transport the ambassador and I back to the station so the meeting could take place in reality. Because Yuxi was busy, it was clear the meeting would happen after our next impactor attack. Hopefully that attack would be a surprise success and render our risky fledgling plan moot. Ben's Isolation Lodge, near Seaside Habitat, Martian Surface Tuesday, late afternoon, December 12th, 3116. Her Royal Highness Neothras loved the Valley Dawn painting and had thanked me with a long hug, followed by a quick kiss on the cheek. I got more satisfaction from seeing Ben's happy look at our exchange. My grandson had noted my effort to bring Deja into the fold, so to speak, and I caught his small, quick nod of appreciation as his non-terrestrial inamorata released me. After our greeting, Deja gave Riho and me a tour of their isolation lodge. Unlike the common, more economical underground lodges favored on Mars, theirs was on the surface, or at least the lodge's upper hemisphere, which contained the main living spaces, was exposed above the surface. From the exterior, their lodge resembled a large igloo, a curving dome of seamless, blue-tinted ice. The pressure-stabilized ice was both an easily procured local resource and also a very effective shield against cosmic rays. It also allowed the upper part of their lodge to remain translucent, letting in natural light without portholes and making the interior experience seem less bunker-like as was common with the underground dwellings. Even with the below-freezing surface temperatures, the inside of their lodge was cozy and warm. One of the first questions I'd asked was how they kept from melting their roof. Ben had explained that there were two inner plastic pressure bubbles just under the ice layer. Both layers insulated the ice and reflected heat back into the interior. The lower level of their lodge contained the primary airlock. This level also contained two identical bedroom suites and other utility spaces. Deja directed us to the guest suite, where Omu deposited our small travel case of non-disposable possessions. We then ascended a spiraling stairwell to the main living area above. The upper level was one large open space over 12 meters across and 6 meters high. The setting sun shining down into the valley from the west lit the interior of the ice shell with an almost warm yellow glow. Ben then demonstrated the shell's integrated imagers could render high-definition views of the exterior, thus negating the need for exterior windows. The inner bubble could also be made fully opaque, which surprised me when the hemispherical space quickly plunged into darkness. A fantasy sky soon appeared, filled with shooting stars, comets, and swirling galaxies. The amazing display took me back to my time spent living under the ocean aboard Nautilus, as the sub's lounge had a curved roof similar to the interior of Ben's lodge. The built-in imaging capability also explained how and where we would be watching the pending second frontal attack. We enjoyed a nice dinner that emphasized some of the local specialties. Seaside had two professional farmers who shared space in a communal greenhouse. With the current and season crops being spring vegetables, we were treated to a wonderful Cobb salad. Dessert was Martian foam, an ice cream-like concoction that involved exposing extruded sugared goat's cream to the near-vacuum cold of the Martian atmosphere. The dry, frozen strands were then gathered and spun into a ball to be served with our choice of toppings. I loved it enough that I instructed Naomi to coordinate with the local producer to occasionally transport freshly made batches back to Serenity. She could then add rare culinary specialties to the island's offerings, and thus increase its popularity. To attempt to cover for the wasteful exuberance, I did mandate that this was to only occur when Naomi had a surplus of transport energy. The AI assured me that there were times when such extra reserves were available. After our meal, Deja took Riho off to look at her small art gallery of billion-year-old Martian fossils. Ben took me to their garage so he could show off the custom Mars buggy he was building. As always, I was amazed at how the traditional gender splits and roles had returned in our new future society. I'd actively worked to start anew, but easy access to the digitally stored media from the before times still affected our society. I did have to admit that the familiarity was comforting to me in many ways. "What's up with Riho?" Ben had asked after we'd closed the engine covers on his project car. He'd noticed that my companion had acted differently tonight. "She just returned from a long virtual session with her twin back on Earth," I explained. I then had to explain further how there was another presence of the alien active in the simulated reality project. I'd also explained how Riho's other self had been brought into existence in a recreation of the insect-like Hemru true physical form. This meant the simulation included the complex and alien Hemru brain and thought patterns. Riho, my Riho, wanted the two versions of herself to remain in sync as much as possible. Thus, the periodic sessions where their thoughts were exchanged, mingled, and blended. At the conclusion of these sessions, both versions were altered. Although my Riho eventually returned mostly to how she had been beforehand. It was all very confusing, and I had to admit to my grandson, somewhat disturbing. "That's amazing," Ben finally replied, "and I can understand how that it would weird you out. So does the bug form Hemru back in the SRP interact with the Picket version that still lives there?" "Not that I know of," I replied. "There are over 20 versions of Picket in existence now, though. I think they had discussed having one iteration interact with the Hemru. Let's check if that happened." "Naomi?" "Iteration 22 of Picket was allowed to learn of the presence of the Hemru, and there has been interaction." Naomi relayed via my implant. Ben had stiffened slightly, so my AI had included him in the reply. "In addition, the Hemru awareness has observed clandestinely 6 other active iterations, where Picket and the Master AI are firmly in control of Saul. The alien has also participated in 4 iterations, where a civil war is ongoing between the assemblage forces and feral humans." "Naomi?" Ben asked almost hesitantly. "How many iterations of Picket are there?" "There are currently 142 active iterations, Benjamin." That startled me. I had been unaware that there were so many. Although the number varies on a week-to-week basis and new branches are allowed to propagate and older ones pruned. "Why so many Pickets?" I asked. "Has something new come up?" "The overall number of digital copies tracks with the early projections of how many simulations would be needed for proper studies." Ben began asking another question, but instead I heard Naomi continue speaking into my implant. "John, 14 new Picket iterations were created just 20 hours ago. I deduced the need for these additional simulated realities because of your recent discussion with Hannah and Alec. I plan to discuss details when you have your next planning session with Ukes, Hannah, and Alec." Naomi had to be referring to our recent talk on how to use a raider ship baited with wormhole technology to penetrate the enemy's defenses. The AI must have created the new iterations of Picket and the Master AI to further that ruse. "Interesting. I was curious, but now was not the time. I look forward to learning about them," I subvocally replied to the AI. Shortly after, our man-cave session broke up and we rejoined the others. I was surprised to see that Ambassador Riho was now wearing Martian facial sigils, just like Deja. It was a small red crescent with twin diamond points centered on her forehead. She just shrugged when I raised my eyebrows at the markings. 15 minutes before the launch of the second kinetic attack, and with our appetites sated, Deja directed Riho and me to our seats in the main lounge area. Because we were treating this evening as a private family get-together, Adele was not in attendance. I did concede and allowed her to have Omu take a few still images once we were gathered to watch the live attack attempt. "Mavors, please link us into the military feeds," Her Highness said. "At once, Princess Neothoris," the Martian AI said. "Please be aware that Alec Uxe Abrams, Hannah Crather Venezia, and Uxe Esperanza are standing by to merge feeds. Shall I allow them to jointly access?" Deja giggled, and I caught Ben's frown. "Oops, silly me. I'm so used to doing this in virtual that I forgot." "Of course. Let them share our format, Mavers." The room's background lighting dimmed, and the domed projection ceiling became a multi-windowed, high-resolution display. Our seating reclined back to our individual preferences as data and imagery began filling in the various windows. Though this was far more intimate, I was reminded of the old IMAX-domed movie theaters of my youth. Images appeared showing my son, Hannah, and my former wife in smaller windows to the left. I smirked as Hannah and Alec were barely concealing their annoyance at being kept waiting. Ixa's image was impassive, and I saw that it was digital recreation. Physically, she was currently in deep immersion in the Phobos control room and would be monitoring our watch session only intermittently and when her full attention was not needed elsewhere. I recognized the background behind Alec as that of his apartment on the Elon 2 space station. Hannah was not with him, nor was she in her quarters. From her sweaty leotard and from the actively exercising shells behind her, she must be working off her pre-attack anxiety in one of the station's workout rooms. The other windows were other areas on Phobos, the overall control room, the power dynamo field, and the big wormhole gimbal structure itself. There was a closer-in view of the big torus, which showed the tungsten impactor bundle with its long and bulky maneuvering stage attached to, loaded into its launching mechanism. A new series of windows opened which showed similar views of the Sarissa facility on Vesta. Because of the many unknowns with tonight's risky attack, we'd be creating the Sarissa observation wormhole much earlier than with the attacks previously. Despite the extra energy required, we'd wanted the telescope sensor in place and monitoring the enemy Ark when we sent the weapons package through. We chatted with Alec and Hannah about many things as the countdown continued. I mostly listened as Ben and Deja did most of the talking. I was amused as Alec and Hannah carefully skirted the subject of what they did up on the station. We'd been trying to keep the details of our planned excursion to the enemy Ark closely held for as long as possible. At just under 5 minutes remaining, Ux found a moment to appear and give us a full update on the preparations. I was happy to hear that all was proceeding as planned. After attending to our questions, she then returned to full immersion. The Vesta orbital power dynamo became active at 2 minutes, providing additional power to Sarissa, whose capacitor banks were running low. This was followed immediately after by the sequential activation of 6 of the larger Phobos atomic dynamo units. Sarissa activated at 90 seconds remaining, its terminus targeted to a 0.8 light seconds ahead of the enemy Ark and nearly 250,000 kilometers off to the side. The sensor stalk we were poking through would be larger with multiple telescopes. It would be watching the approaching Ark and also scanning the area ahead of it for any debris shield devices. At 30 seconds, I glanced over to see that Deja had finally abandoned us for her virtual forms. I'd been surprised that she'd stuck around this long, but just as I was about to ignore her and focus on the displays, I caught her shell becoming active as she exited virtual. She rubbed her head, looking fatigued, and caught me watching her. "Sorry, I forgot to record my speeches for the Mars forum. I managed to finish 3 versions by using accelerated virtual. I'm not used to that speed, so now I feel mentally wiped out." I nodded in understanding. I declined recording my own speeches for this attempt, as my pushing for it was still a sore subject. Naomi agreed that my remaining apart and silent would be helpful, giving those aggrieved the freedom to rant or rave as they wished, and thus venting pent-up emotions. The AI would be monitoring, of course, and taking notes. Primary wormhole formation commencing. Praxia AI's no-nonsense military voice announced over the military data feed. The chamber's ceiling display was now busy with activity. On the right were windows showing both atomic dynamos firing in full blaze. Windows devoted to Sarissa's twin telescopes were showing the distant oncoming Ark, and also the empty region where the Phobos wormhole terminus was targeted to form. The window showing the Phobos torus caught my eye. It was energizing, and spatial distortion rings were forming at the center of the big torus. Spatial Rift, now open and stable, deploying the Phobos fringe sensor array and launching the enhanced impactor bundle. A new window opened showing the distant star field from 8 light-years away as seen by the new fringe sensor. This image panned around quickly as the terminus coordinates were determined. Half the star field went black as a large object shot past. Impactor bundle transfer complete. Precise terminus location now determined. The map window enlarged and red markers appeared. On it was labeled the locations of the oncoming Ark and the Phobos terminus. Suddenly, additional flashing red data marks appeared. Before I could attempt to parse the new warnings, Praxia spoke up. "Warning, terminus location anomaly. The arrival point overshot the expected coordinates by approximately 6 kilometers. The AI was speaking so fast I could barely understand it." I was about to ask for an explanation when Ben spoke. Did we send it too far away for the maneuvering stage to compensate? For this attempt, we had wanted the wormhole to form slightly off to the side of the enemy's approach vector. This was to both hopefully avoid any leading debris shielding and to also be outside the main scanning area of the Ark's forward-facing weapon system. The maneuvering stage had the thrust to compensate for a maximum of 7 kilometers of distance in the 9 seconds before the Ark arrived. The less it had to correct the bundle, the greater time the individual impactors would have to disperse. It was akin to a shotgun. Too close and the dispersal would mean a tight pattern, too far, and the individual pellets would spread too far apart to score a hit, especially with our bird incoming at a fraction of the speed of light. "No," Praxia replied, speaking normally again. "The wormhole emerged beyond the optimal target point, near the center of the enemy's approach vector. But that was good, right? I looked to Omu, but the android appeared unresponsive, frozen and staring down slightly. "Jon!" I heard Ux shriek. Simultaneously, the display window showing imagery from the Phobos fringe sensor went dark. Other windows went blank, including the window showing the exterior of the Phobos wormhole gantry. Oddly, that window had flared bright white for a couple of milliseconds, almost like a flashbulb triggering, before it too had gone dark. Ux's direct feed froze, and I immediately looked for the window showing the overall control room, hoping to spot her console where she was physically in deep interface. The complex was a scene of chaos with numerous strobing warning lights. The 3 pressure-suited emergency zombie herder personnel could be seen hurrying into action. Most of the technicians who had been in deep interface were now undergoing emergency extraction. Others who needed to remain interfaced were being isolated by rapidly deploying clear cylindrical pressure curtains, which dropped from the ceiling. The image began to glitch as an earthquake passed through the control room. 2 of the now active humans attempting to don pressure suites fell to the ground as the main lights failed. The emergency lights came on, joining with the erratic sparking of numerous electrical shorts. The room video feed then froze completely. I looked at the other windows showing Alec and Hannah to see if whatever happening on Phobos was affecting them. Both their shells were slack, their eyes closed. They had both entered into virtuality to try and find out what had happened. Their video feeds were stable, and the activity around them appeared normal. I was about to ask what the hell was happening when Omu unfrozen spoke. An unwanted transient has occurred, causing a blowback explosion at the Phobos primary wormhole site. The android quickly rose from where it had been kneeling and continued. Multiple injuries are being recorded with some loss of life. However, thus far, there are no casualties at the primary control center. "What's happening, Omu? Did the assemblage counterattack?" my grandson asked. "Much is uncertain at this time, Ben," Omu replied. "From the shockwave propagation readings currently reverberating across Phobos, a rapid energy release of approximately 37 E plus 15 joules, or just under 2 megatons TNT equivalent, has occurred at the wormhole gantry site. The likely cause of such an energy release would be an accidental backtransference of high spatial velocity matter." "Is Ux alive?" I finally managed to utter. "Yes, Jon, I am alive. I am currently in deep interface with my shell sealed in an emergency pressure enclosure. I will get back to you when I have a free moment." New windows were opening on the dome display. One was a view of Phobos from the nearby fissionable refinery satellite. It showed an expanding plasma bubble forming over the outer surface of Phobos. The energy release was already dispersing and the plasma ball dimming. "The impactor bundle was deployed early," Deja said. She was watching the relayed data coming in through Sarissa. An enlarged map window opened, which showed an expanding ring of tungsten penetrator icons. The booster stage was also indicated in the middle of the expanding ring. As we watched, its course curved as it actively continued maneuvering, deploying decoys and chaff. The Ark arrival countdown was down to just a few seconds. "What's happening at the Ark?" I asked, despite my worry over my ex-wife. Praxia's voice answered, "Bundle dispersal occurred early with the unexpected arrival near the center of the Ark's approach vector." The overall map window now showed the Ark coming in fast from that right. I was torn between my worry for the casualties and what was happening at the Ark. The countdown showed 1 second when the enhanced map display flared with multiple bursts of energy. For a brief moment, I thought these were impacts on the enemy Ark itself before I realized that the enemy was moving so fast that we'd not even register it passing through the enlarged telescope view. What were the flashes then? As the countdown reached 0, a much larger flash occurred on the enhanced Sarissa window. It was a streak of light that shot off to the left of the display. What the hell was happening? The screen began to clear, and I was able to make out over 24 slowly expanding impactor icons. With the Ark already gone, these were clearly impactors that had missed their target and were now simply interstellar space debris. I switched my attention back to the overall map display. New streams of data were scrolling down all around the chart. I noted that 2 large numerical indicators displayed the number of casualties and deaths, the latter number changing from 5 to 6 almost instantly. The number of casualties was in the dozens, and also going up incrementally as data streamed in. "I can't follow any of this," I frustratingly yelled. Omu spoke in a calming tone. "Data is coming in too fast to be disseminated intelligently, John. There will be further, more detailed analysis coming soon to explain what has occurred. For now, I will simplify the AI Advisory Council's conclusions thus far. First, the Phobos wormhole accidentally formed almost directly in the patch of the oncoming arc. Next, seconds after transferring the penetrator bundle, the wormhole clearly ingested unknown matter traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. This unplanned transient caused a rapid cascade failure of the exotic matter spatial compensation coils in the Phobos wormhole mechanism. Before a coil explosion could occur, however, the transient matter impacted the bundle deployment mechanism just beyond the wormhole aperture, immediately vaporizing both. The android paused for a moment before continuing. "The expanding energy plasma has destroyed both the Phobos wormhole gantry and much of the nearby supporting infrastructure. Luckily, the shunting wormhole safety systems activated in time to prevent the spread of destruction. In addition, the active magnetoplasma dynamic power generators were scrammed successfully, resulting in no damage to energy production, although all safety relays will need to be replaced." "What caused the deaths and injuries?" I asked. "The moonquake resulting from the initial energy release caused the human casualties," Omu reported. "Uxe is all right?" I asked the android. Omu nodded as Uxe replied, "I told you I'm fine. I'm just busy parsing the incoming data. Can you believe our bad luck? With less than 0.5% chance, we pulled off a bullseye, but at the worst time when we did not want one. I'll be out of deep interface as soon as I can." The window from the refinery satellite in close orbit around Phobos opened. It quickly began looping a 3-second clip showing the gantry explosion. The carnage began with a blinding flash, followed by the wormhole excavation, volcanoing plasma and debris. Being in hard vacuum, the energy dissipated almost instantly, although the Phobos surface remained glowing at the end of the clip. "2 more humans are now reported deceased," Omu stated. "All deaths have thus far occurred because of the emergency deceleration of the gravity habitat ring. Too many ignored the warnings or were struck by uncontrolled objects. Medical mobile units are being activated to assist and stabilize the injured." New windows opened showing various camera feeds from inside the nearly stopped gravity habitat. What a mess! The ring was still undergoing emergency deceleration, and liquids, loose objects including equipment and people, were crashing and tumbling around. I watched the suffering and carnage for a moment until I noticed a new window in the Sarissa area of the display. It was another looping image which kept repeating a highly enhanced, close-up view of the bow of the enemy arc. 2 large, rapidly expanding plasma eruptions were being shown over and over. I almost cheered when I realized that the explosions must have been caused by our kinetic impactors striking the arc. But then I looked closer, spotting something that I had missed in the first few repetitions. As one of the plasma fireballs grew, I was also able to note that part of it was being illuminated further by an energy beam or some other discharge that was tearing through it. The source of the beam had to be the assemblage forward-facing laser emitter. Also, I saw that the beam was not static as it was weaving through the expanding plasma cloud as if it were being aimed. "Note the new enhanced telescopic imagery," Omu reported, noting what I was observing. "It is probable that 2 of the deployed impactors struck the bow of the enemy arc," Omu said. "Each energy release is equivalent to that produced by an object similar in mass to one impactor colliding with an iron-nickel object traveling at 7.496% of the speed of light." "We'd hit it. Not once but twice." Deja spoke next. "Martian civil defense has activated. All available people with medical training are being mobilized and are to proceed immediately to the nearest orbital launch facility. I've got to get ready." She then jumped up and headed down the spiraling stairs to the level below. "I've got to go too, Dad," Alex said from his display window. "Mavers is having all of us with vacuum construction experience currently here on Elon, transported to Phobos to assist with the rescue operation." His window winked out. A few seconds later, Hannah's did also. She had still been in virtual when it vanished, but I realized that with her having similar skills as Alec, she'd be sent also. I'd have to check in with them once they were underway. Why is the assemblage energy beam causing scintillations in the expanding impact ejecta and plasma? Riho asked. She was still studying the replay of the explosions we'd caused on the bow of the enemy Ark. Sarissa's sensors are detecting radiation signatures which indicate ongoing matter annihilation, Omu replied. It is likely that the assemblage's forward energy weapon is an antimatter particle lance. I thought it was supposed to be a big laser, I asked distractedly. I was in a state of turmoil and didn't know where to focus my thoughts. Should I go up to Phobos and help? It is conceivable that the forward energy emitter is dual purpose, both a laser and an antimatter particle projector, Omu explained. Using gamma diffraction technology, annihilation energies could be collimated into a coherent photon beam suitable for interstellar range communications. If so, it would indeed be an efficient and elegant dual use of resources. The ceiling window, showing live sensor imagery from Sarissa, shut down. The scrolling data indicating the suspension was due to low energy reserves on Vesta. Other windows opened, showing more scenes of carnage on and around Phobos. Maps of the underground excavations on the moon appeared. These indicated the locations of the casualties and the severity of their injuries. Other icons indicated damaged areas, which were in danger of causing further loss of life. Matching tables appeared showing how the AIs plan to distribute our rescue and medical resources, both mobile units and humans, along with the estimated times of arrival for each. Deja returned from below carrying a medical trauma kit and a quick-deploy pressure suit. A hopper taxi is on its way to take me to the launch area, she said out of breath. I was impressed that when there was a need, she responded without hesitation, willing to risk herself for others. Naomi, can we help? I subvocally asked. Yes, John. Using my own facilities and also the lunar transport network, I can transport a very limited number of humans to various Phobos staging points as well as evacuate critical need casualties to medical facilities here on Earth. Can you relay Deja directly from this isolation lodge? Affirmative. Your current location is always targeted and locked. Note, transferring Her Highness in this manner will be energy inefficient, as I have to bring her here to Earth orbit before sending her back to Phobos. Do so, just for her. Then transport anyone from Earth who can and is willing to help, or send casualties back for care. Do so as you see fit. Of course, John. Stand by for wormhole terminus in 3 seconds. Deja, hold on, I exclaimed. Cancel the taxi. I have a better way. She was looking exasperated. Omu jumped up and moved her away from the open area near the stairs. A shimmer in the air resolved into a circular wormhole terminus forming near the floor. Once the circle had stabilized, a transport cylinder quickly rose and opened. I've arranged for your direct transport to Phobos. You will be one of the first to arrive. Good luck. You will need to don your suit before you depart, Your Highness, Omu said, taking the garment from her. I will assist. Ben had risen and gone to her while this was happening. He helped seal her helmet, gave her a quick hug, and told her to be safe. After that, she thanked me and hustled into the waiting cylinder. 5 seconds later, she and the wormhole were gone. I bet having a personal wormhole is better than your own electrojet, Dad, Ben said, smiling wryly. It's recent. I've only used it a few times, I explained, slightly embarrassed at the exuberant display. Uxa's window became animated, her virtual image replaced by her real physical shell. John, Mavers has forced me out of interface so I can be evacuated. She did not appear too upset at the news. We've determined that our too precise wormhole impacted the final assemblage debris shield. I've sent you enhanced images. Ben and I retook our seats and watched a new window appear. It was another close-up from the Sarissa telescope imagery. This time, a small oval shape was highlighted. The stars were moving in the background, so whatever the oval was, it was moving at a very high rate of speed. What's that? Ben asked. That is what we hope is the last stage of a multi-stage debris shield. As we suspected, the assemblage uses a Whipple-type shielding system very similar to that which we employed on Evadare, Sovrana, and Vexidus. Spectral traces even indicate that the assemblage system uses carbon graphene disks, as we do. Watch closely now. There was an instant bright flash very near the edge of the oval, Immediately, a streak of light shot off screen in the same direction as the background star's motion. That was our wormhole, and a large number of just dispersed impactors, striking the edge of the circular shield disk. Note it only shows as an oval in this imagery due to the current point of view of Sarissa's telescope imager. The streak was the jet of expanding plasma created by the destruction of the impactors that did not survive. So our wormhole did impact their oncoming shield just as we feared? I asked. It appears so, Ux replied. She then became silent, and we watched one of the zombie herders assist her in extracting herself out of her interface cradle. She was going to be one of the last to leave the control room. The window which had been showing her face switched to a room camera from the shelter airlock just outside the control room. Ux soon appeared in the camera view, pulling herself from handhold to handhold swiftly to where a waiting technician was handing out generic pressure suits. I'm going over to Elon with most of the brainheads. There, we'll help manage the rescues and triage remotely, she explained as her helmet was fitted. We are riding over in an unpressurized material tug to save room on the pressurized transports for the wounded. I'll be in virtual for most of the trip, so it won't be too bad. I'd known her long enough to detect the tiniest bit of fear in her voice as she said that. I debated having Naomi pick her up via wormhole, but decided to save that resource for the wounded. As Uxie said, she would be busy in virtual for the slow boat ride. Being cooped up in a pressure suit would serve just fine for that, and her augment stuck in her shell would not feel fear. Have a safe ride, honey, I said. I'm not yet sure what I can do to help. If they need more grunts in suits, I'll make my way up to Phobos. I've reviewed the rescue projections, John, Ux replied. I recommend you just stay put there. We've got enough bots and vac-rated workers on the way, and most of the severely wounded will be evac'd directly to Luna. Thank you for your help with that, by the way. Maybe you could give a briefing on Conscientia about what has gone down. I agreed to hold off on rushing into anything. We said goodbye and the display window showing her vanished. She's quite an amazing woman, isn't she? Ben mused. I just grunted in response. Ben, being Larissa Daring's son and having Hannah as his almost grandmother, had never been exposed to Ux much. I was glad that my extended family was getting to know my second wife and seeing her as the amazing genius that she was. I was a lucky man. Though Hannah and Ux were light years apart, they each excelled in their own area of specialty. My attention was distracted by new windows opening, which showed live external views of the Phobos installation. The imagery was clearly taken from moving spacecraft or other space-worthy mobile units. They were likely the first arriving rescue forces. Holy hell, what a mess, I muttered as I took in the various scenes of destruction. What little remained of the enormous gimbaling outer wormhole structure was a tangled mess. The exposed surface hemispherical excavation was no longer glowing and was now lit by the flickering light of burning plasma fires or electrical discharges. I could not find any of the inner wormhole Taurus machinery. It had been either ejected into space or reduced to lumps of slag. There was nothing to salvage except the crater-like Phobos excavation itself. The view panned wildly as the craft doing the imaging had to suddenly dodge a large incoming chunk of debris. Now that I knew to watch for it, I was able to spot dozens of other nearby bits of flotsam. The Phobos orbital area, and likely soon, most of close Martian orbital space, had been rendered hazardous to traffic. Look at all the debris, Ben exclaimed. Trajectories have already been calculated, and tugs from all orbital manufactories have been dispatched to intercept, Omu replied. They will begin with the largest and most threatening objects and work their way down. For the next 10 minutes, Ben, Raiho, and I watched the ongoing rescue. At the wormhole crater, the arriving spaceborne mobile units had quickly extinguished the few still burning plasma fires. Others had locked down the remaining active and arcing energy conduits. Larger tug units began towing loose chunks of debris out of the area. Omu explained that the material would be taken to a staging point up at the moonlet's L2 point, barely 20 kilometers above the far side surface. Once at the unstable gravity point, the objects would be left floating free, but with small thruster units attached to keep them from drifting. When things were less hectic, the wreckage would be brought back to the moon's surface for remanufacturing or taken to one of the orbital construction yards. All this would take a lot of conventional rocket fuel. Ben had already begun making communications to help get the ball rolling for that. The search and rescue teams formed up and began to make their way into the underground tunnels of Phobos. Other triage teams had been poked directly into the wrecked gravity habitat where most of the casualties were located. Deja's transponder indicated that she had been with the first groups. Once the wounded had been stabilized, they were encased in foam cocoons and then poked out by wormhole, with most being transported directly to the Luna wormhole facility and then onto some nearby medical complex. Naomi had stopped using her High Castle wormhole when the space station's considerable energy reserves ran low. She had wanted to maintain enough energy in reserve to pull me out of Mars and back to Earth if necessary. I used my override to force her to use that energy instead to continue assisting in the evacuation. As compensation, I did promise that I would safely stay put at Ben's isolation lodge to minimize any risk to myself. I'd questioned why the AI was concerned about rescuing me from the Martian surface. I'd guessed that maybe it was due to the now slightly higher risk from the new Phobos' debris raining down. I'd been sobered to learn that Naomi was worried that I was now at an elevated risk of being attacked by some group of disgruntled humans. My decision to remain at Ben's isolation lodge helped. For one, few knew I was here. The other reason was that, being an isolation lodge, it was isolated. This made it easy for Naomi to watch from orbit. The AI would have plenty of warning if rebellion began to foment and someone tried something truly regrettable. Around midnight local time, I finally excused myself and adjourned to Ben's guest room suite. Riho had already gone to bed and did not stir when I crawled into bed next to her. This was normal, as she always slept under the control of her augment. What a day! After laying there rehashing the evening and being unable to sleep for nearly 20 minutes, I finally resorted to using my augment to put myself into REM sleep like she did. I would need my rest for what was to come.